Hello, ladies and gentlemen, people of multiple identities and sexualities, and welcome back to another Doctor Who review. Another two-part review, but a review nonetheless. First, we shall start with the name of the Doctor, and then we shall continue with Day of the Doctor. So without further ado, let's jump right into the story. The Doctor's friends are called to a meeting when all of a sudden a murderer by the name of James Marco delivers a message to Madame Vastra. The Doctor has a secret, you know. He has one he will take to the grave, and it is discovered. So, Vastra decides to assemble all the Doctor's known friends and associates at the time in order to warn them of the oncoming crisis. Clara eventually gets to finally meet Professor Riversong. When the message is played, River jumps back in fear as she soon realizes exactly what the message is. And she soon realizes that the message isn't just any message, it's a warning. Something he must never do. The Doctor will be lost forevermore unless he comes to Trenzalore. River frantically starts chucking wine around the room and drinks at people in hopes that they will wake up. Sadly, unbeknownst to River at the time, the Great Intelligence is already one step ahead, sending its foot soldiers to capture the Doctor's companions one by one in hopes of bringing them to Trenzalore as a law for the Doctor, giving him no choice but to go and save his friends. A bit of backstory into the Great Intelligence. The first time the Doctor ever met the Great Intelligence was in his second incarnation in Tibet. He then met them again on the London Underground, and then the most two recent times the Doctor met the Intelligence during this point in time was one when he goes to a governess in search of this mysterious woman from the lake who is still alive, and the other time is when a tech company starts uploading people into their software and adding them to the grid. Doctor turns up at Clara's house playing blind man's bluff with the kids, but they use it as a way to get out of the house into the cinema. The Doctor jokes and gyrates around the place, but then suddenly his tone changes as soon as Clara points out that she was given a message that reads that the Doctor must go to Trenzalore. He at first laughs it off in pain and sorrow, hoping that the message isn't true, but sadly he knows it's time and that he must go and save his friends if he can, especially after all the things that they have done for him in the past. The Doctor points this out to Clara and then goes in the TARDIS. They both crash land on the planet Trenzalore and enter the Doctor's tomb. Not speaking a word of his name, but knowing that someone else did, just so that they could enter the tomb. The Great Intelligence has bigger plans though. He attempts to walk into the Doctor's time stream and kill every single version of the Doctor before he even has the chance to stop the Great Intelligence's plans. The Great Intelligence is eventually ripped apart as Clara jumps in after him and saves the Doctor at every turn, deeming herself the impossible girl once and for all. But the Doctor isn't satisfied with this. He has a talk with River and points out that he could always see her even though she was dead. He then jumps through the portal in order to save Clara. He finds himself in a hall full of all his other faces, all his other lives, but he remembers that there is one life, one moment he wishes he could forget. Suddenly, Clara collapses as the time streams suddenly become too much for her. He helps pull her up and holds her in his arms, but in doing so, as he begins to leave the place, he finds the one version of himself, the one incarnation he locked away out of his mind for so long. What I did without choice, I know, in the name of peace and sanity, but not in the name of the Doctor. The Doctor walks away, leaving his incarnation to face the camera, as we finally get a look on the grey old man who stands in a dusty battlefield, surrounded by dust and ash. So, the name of the Doctor, that's the brief summary of the story. What did I think of it when I watched it and every time I have watched it? Well, I think it's a very strong story, and I like the element of the TARDIS being broken and trapped in part of his time stream. The only thing I don't quite believe is the way it breaks down and the dimensions kind of grow, um, simply on the basis that we only see a short capacity of the Doctor's life when we know the Doctor's life is infinite and the time stream doesn't exactly replicate that. But other than that, I would say it's a solid story, so for that reason, I give it a 7 out of 10. So now we enter Day of the Doctor, in which we will have to take you a little bit back in time, and also mention a little mini-sode, what's here, just so you understand the context of everything that happens leading up to this story and how it does evolve the show as a whole. So, without further ado, grab your sonic screwdrivers, grab your fezzes, grab your jammy dodgers and your custard creams, because it's about to get real. First, we have to start with the Time War Volume 1 by Big Finish, and as a story, it's very solid and it does help you understand how the Doctor gets drawn into the Time War itself. We know from the history of the show that the Doctor has known about a war, so this is not the first time, but it is definitely the closest to the chronology of how the Doctor fights in the Time War. What happens in this story is basically the Doctor and his companion land on a star cruiser. They are trying to relax. They don't want to fight. They just want to have a nice, normal holiday. Well, Doctor's adventures are never normal, but they want a nice, normal holiday, and for the most part, it works out that way at first. A little bit of mystery, a little bit of intrigue, a little bit of normal for the Doctor. But all of a sudden, a time distortion cracks over creation, causing everything that the Doctor knows to cease to exist. The Doctor knows his companion, but she doesn't know him in the same way. She knows that he is on board the ship, but suddenly they are not together. And this slowly begins to break the Doctor. It causes the Doctor to have a bit of a headache in a way because he feels betrayed and he feels lost. And soon he finds himself in this box set having to join the Time Lord ranks, not out of choice, but out of punishment for staying away from the war for so long. And he finds himself at odds and taking the mick in really funny ways out of the Colonels. They they basically enlist him to the Time Lord army, and the Doctor just kind of sits on the corner and mocks them. And sadly for him, there is a young lad in the ranks who really looks up to the Doctor, and during the night, the young lad finds a Dalek scout troop who he tries to disarm and tries to attack, and it doesn't work out. And this hits the Doctor even more, as After all the rebellious behaviour, telling them to chuck food in the cafeteria, suddenly all the soldiers turn on the Doctor slightly, just because they feel betrayed. They feel that the one piece of hope in the war has been let down. But eventually, after avoiding many conflicts and helping where he can, the Doctor finally gives in and finds himself on the planet Karn, in which he crash lands after trying to save a civilian who is afraid of the Time Lords. She crash lands and dies, but the Doctor survives just barely. He finds himself regenerating and angry and very, very annoyed. He finds himself divided, and soon he decides to regenerate into a new incarnation. This happens in the Night of the Doctor and is carried over into a box set for Big Finish called The War Doctor Begins. So the War Doctor regenerates, and anytime anyone calls him Doctor is very angry about it. He doesn't believe he deserves the title Doctor, as he could not save a life. And throughout his incarnation, he finds himself in battlefield after battlefield, gently interfering with some situations, but at the same time finding strategy. And this incarnation of the Doctor eventually decides that it's time for him to take up arms, and he begins using weapons and explosives, anything he can, in order to destroy the Daleks. And in doing so, he even finds himself in a conflict outside of time and space itself with his old friend Leela. When they find this machine the Daleks must never get their hands on. And at this point in time, the Doctor finally thinks to himself, it's time to end the war once and for all. And so he goes looking for the moment. Meanwhile, elsewhere, another incarnation, the most recent incarnation of the Doctor, is called to the National Gallery when a load of paintings have been smashed. The Doctor takes Clara as his associate and walks in around to inspect the paintings. He points out that all the paintings that have been smashed have not been smashed from the outside, but in fact it's smashed from the inside. As Osgood begins to inspect the dust left behind, she finds a very peculiar thing about the room that they had been passing through before they got to the main painting hall. They find out that an alien species known as the Zygons have been hiding inside the paintings and disguising themselves ever since under the sheets in the National Gallery. Elsewhere, whilst this is happening, the Doctor finds himself face to face with a time window. He gets very annoyed and very frustrated, as he believes it is not the right time for it to be intervening with the business he is trying to currently deal with. But nevertheless, he decides to jump through valiantly in order to find answers to his true question. Previous incarnation of the Doctor was enjoying a lovely picnic with Elizabeth I, when all of a sudden the picnic is interrupted by a Zygon disguised as a horse. The Doctor at first assumes it was the Queen, which is very insulting, especially after he proposes to her, but in fact then realizes the pair get split up, and so he runs into the forest in hopes to save her from the Zygon adversary. But in doing so, he finds himself with Chinny the bow tie, and the pair then are reunited with the War Doctor, an incarnation they didn't expect to find, an incarnation they are both very unhappy to see. Anyone lose a Fez? You. What are you doing here? So, more to the point, why are you here? I'm looking for the Doctor. Well, you certainly came to the right place. Oh, who are you boys? Are you his companions? His companions? The Doctors joke. And suddenly, they're getting younger all the time, the doctors joke about. And then suddenly, they find themselves in the midst of two Elizabeths. My apologies, no, that might have happened before. Well, both Elizabeths kiss the doctor and they run off in split directions. The three doctors find themselves eventually being interrogated by one of the Elizabeths as she brings guards to escort them to the tower. When she goes to escort them to the tower, the doctors joke vigorously, one of them pointing out, will there be Wi-Fi and breakfast at 6? And as they do so, to try and get themselves out of it, the doctor try and persuades Clara to act like she's a witch of the well. Unconvinced, all three of them are taken to the tower and the doctors to help Clara in the future. One of them leaves a marking on the wall with Captain Jack's signature time code. Meanwhile, all three of them bicker in a cell for half an hour about how they're going to break out, even though Elizabeth quite clearly doesn't lock the door. All three of them point out the door should have just been locked, and Elizabeth eventually turns up next to Clara, mocking the pair of them, pointing out that she wanted to see if any of them would even bother to escape. But in knowing they wouldn't now, she takes them downstairs to explain the Zygon's plan. The 10th incarnation of the Doctor still tries to hold on to this idea that this is not the real Elizabeth, and it backfires once again, but also hits him where it hurts when he finds out that he still has to marry the Queen of England. So they get married, they fly off in the TARDIS, and now they have to hop to the future in order to avert a war that should never be fought. The Doctors struggle to get into the Black Archive as it seems to be TARDIS proof, all something to do with Brigadier setting up a force field based off of alien technology in the past. The Doctors argue with Kate, pointing out that it is so stupid that the force field is on and that they should be able to be let in because they can help. The War Doctor soon points out to the other two that they don't need to get into the Black Archive because they don't need to get into the Black Archive. The other two look at him confused until he points out that the stasis cube that they had borrowed from the Zygons should allow them to break into the Gallifrey Falls painting and smash right through it into the Black Archive. The Doctors show off and smash a Dalek right through the painting, and soon manage to resolve the situation by wiping the Zygons and humans' memories and making an Osgood box. Two boxes which will keep the ceasefire going, and at any point when the Osgood boxes are broken, the ceasefire will have to be rearranged once again. But whilst this happens, the War Doctor sneakily sneaks off because he knows that the moment is still in his head. The bad wolf is still in his head, asking him the question, what would you do? How would you end it? One big red button. The War Doctor stands in a broken barn on Gallifrey, questioning his decision, unsure about what choice to make. He knows he must make one, and he knows that the one he might make is going to destroy millions, if not billions, of lives. And so he makes his choice, or at least he almost does. The other two Doctors turn up. Somehow the time lock between the situation has been broken, allowing the other two Doctors in. The Doctor previously asked, whilst they were in the cell in the Tower of London, how many children there were on Gallifrey, and the other Doctor points out 4.2 billion. This tortures all three of them, as they know this is the choice that they wish they had never had to make. And so soon, one of them, as the time flashes in front of their eyes, showing them the last days of Gallifrey, they soon realise that there was another way after all. and that the solution was right in front of their faces the whole time. The stasis cube. All three of them jump in their TARDISes and soon call the capital, informing them that they have a solution to the problem, and the solution is to freeze Gallifrey in a single moment in time, locked away in a parallel universe, safe and untouched. As the conference call is open, all incarnations of the Doctor, past and future, begin to leak through, and it is even my belief that not only did the 12th Doctor turn up, but the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th, and even more going forward, had turned up to help freeze Gallifrey in a single moment in time. They wouldn't remember it, but the timelines did diverge for one moment in history, allowing every single incarnation to come in and fix the problem. Two incarnations of the Doctor leave the gallery, going back to their own time. The War Doctor even regenerates into his next incarnation, ready to start a whole new life cycle for himself. Whilst we don't quite know when or where the 10th went, but we know he definitely had a long way to go. As the 11th is left pondering in the gallery, Clara walks off and leaves him to his thoughts. But first she mentions a creator. The creator enters the gallery, and suddenly the Doctor realizes he recognizes his face, and that only one other person in the whole universe, to his knowledge, has carried that face. I recognize that face. I'm sure you do. And in time, you'll find yourself revisiting a few, but just the good old favorites, eh? I heard you were interested in this painting. Yes. What do you make of the title? Which title? There are two. No, you see, that's where everyone is wrong. It's all one title. Gallifrey falls no more. Now what could you think that means, Gallifrey didn't fall. It worked. The Doctor says frantically, jumping up and down. Oh, I'm just a humble creator. I wouldn't know. The Doctor asks the creator, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to go looking for Gallifrey now? Is that what I'm supposed to do? Oh, that is up to you. But things get lost, you know. Who knows? Who knows? The creator leaves the gallery in a mysterious tone, leaving the Doctor to his thoughts, finally realizing that he did manage to save Gallifrey once and for all. But what should he do? Should he go looking for it? Or should he leave it as a mystery? Well, that's a whole other story in itself, isn't it? Do know is that in a monologue in the story at the very end, the Doctor finds himself on the clouds, standing amongst his fellow Doctors, watching up at a Gallifrey. Now, whether this was just a dream or not, we don't know. Day of the Doctor, what do I rate it? Well, it's a very solid story with a lot of history behind it, and it has evolved over so much time. From the early stories mentioning of a lost planet, a time traveller walking through eternity, to actually seeing the depths from Day of the Doctor to Time War Big Finish stories. We soon understand the mass of the effects of the war, and we understand the pain of a character who has lost so much and knows so much about the conflict and the nightmare child which ate a ship. We soon learn that the war affected both sides. The Daleks' masses were depleting, weapons were becoming useless, but also at the same time, the Time Lords themselves became corrupted by a war that they were engulfed in. And for this reason, I give Day of the Doctor a 10 out of 10. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next Doctor Who review. Until then, stay beautiful.